Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started this evening, and thanks for coming out. I know the weather's been a little bit questionable, so appreciate you coming out. For those who don't know, my name is Casey Foster. I work for the Department of Agriculture. For those of you who are in our Senior Farmers Market program, appreciate that. Hopefully all of you guys got your ID stall signs, and if you're recertified this year, thanks for putting up going through that process. Coupons for that program you should see starting, we're started June 1st. We're here today. We've been working with the United States Department of Agriculture's Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. If you want to know what specialty crops are, as in terms of this program, it consists of dry beans, potatoes, fruits and vegetables, tree nuts, and floriculture. A few years ago, we got some specialty crop block grant funding to provide some produce growers across the state with some money to build some season extension practice units. After the first year of being built, the second year, it was the responsibility to host a farm tour to share what they've developed and to share their experiences of what's worked well, even what has not worked well. So I've been working with Stacy Adams here at the university on this project. I'm the grants manager, but I don't know a lot about season extension practices where he's the expert. So it's been a good partnership with him. This is the second year of our farm tours and last year. So grants were given out to 5 different produce growers. Leigh here has built 2 movable high tunnels, one on a wood rail system, the other one on a rail system. We've had tours in different parts of the state, in Brunswick, down to Hebron, here in Gurley. We'll have one near Dwight, Nebraska. So we picked different parts of the state to have different season extension practices to represent different areas in Nebraska in terms of climate and soil conditions. Any questions about that so far? The Department of Agriculture administers this specialty crop block grant program from the United States Department of Agriculture. So we've got funding for the next several years in the new Farm Bill to provide projects out there that are designed to increase the competitiveness of specialty crops. That I'll introduce Stacy Adams. He's a horticulturalist, professor at the University of Nebraska. He's been partnering me with on this project. I'll have him talk a little bit about high tunnels, season extension practices, and then from there we'll turn it over to Leigh to talk about what she built today.
So I'm Stacy Adams. I'm with the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture there at East Campus at UNL, and I've given some videos online and have been supporting people that are interested in high tunnels and greenhouses. My job is 50% teaching at UNL and then 25% extension and 25% research. My expertise is in greenhouse. I managed greenhouses for 24 years and then switched over to teaching and extension and research here about 5 years ago. So Casey contacted me. He had this grant for season extension practices. I have a poster in the car, and I'll put it out on the table so you can see where the different projects are that we have funded. Primarily what we wanted to do was to attempt to introduce different ways that we can improve our specialty crops. We can grow these things out in the field crops, but we know aesthetics are critical for the consumer when they're buying this. So we want to make sure that we can grow these crops so they don't have blemishes and damage on them as much as possible. The other thing is to make more money as farmers, we don't want to do as much labor, right? So we want less labor, but we'd like longer seasons to grow our crops. So we were looking at a variety of ways to approach that. So we have a lot of unique projects, or we've actually funded about 7, but 5 of them are completing at this point. So when you look at the poster a little bit, you'll see Elm Creek, they put in a shade unit. So Elm Creek is just west of Kearney, Nebraska. They have tomatoes, green beans, spinach, And what their problem is out here for you guys is the volatile weather. And they're having troubles with leaf tatter and damage on their crops. So their particular project was a shade unit. Their shade was a little bit too heavy, but if they would have gone with about a 40% shading, they would have been able to prevent hail and heavy rains from damaging it. Also with the shade, it reduces the speed of the wind going through there, so we get less tatter. One of the projects that we'll in August be having an open house for in Dwight is going to be looking at 4 types of mulches. So there'll be a permanent mulch, which is fabric. There are 2 biodegradable mulches and then one without, if I remember, or no, a plastic mulch and then one without, so you can compare that. They found out with that particular project that they were warming up the soils earlier. They were not interested in plastic. I know Leigh's the same way. They don't really want plastic on their property, so we were looking at some ways to heat up the soil, and it's primarily for cantaloupes, cucurbits, that type of watermelon, so they can get earlier cropping on those. Brunswick, which is clear up in the northern part of the state. We were laughing on our trip out here because we were driving through this volatile weather, and we went to Brunswick. That tornado that hit Wayne passed right by the house because we were there, and we kind of stepped out, and I said, hey, you guys want to see a tornado? Well, unfortunately, that was one of them in that series that night. So we were bound determined if we were going to have a tornado, we'd still be here tonight. But the Brunswick one is unique because that hoop house is a big house. And I think that one's about 36 feet wide.
Yeah.
And it's like 14 feet tall. It's huge. But they're growing raspberries in that particular one. And if anybody knows anything about the northern part of the state, the temperature gets too cold before the berries would be mature all the way. So that one's pretty fascinating, and we were using a combination of cutting their berries at different times in order to lengthen the growing season on that. So we had a couple other ones. One was going to be a 2-acre shade unit. Unfortunately, the guy was in a car wreck, and so we may not see that one for a couple years get completed. He told us he'd like to do it, but he got hung up. And then we had another one that was going to introduce using insect netting to keep beneficial insects inside so they don't blow away, which we thought was pretty cool. Not to mention it would reduce the wind speed in it. So Leigh's out here fascinated Casey and I and the other reviewers on the team because they're interested in the movable high tunnels, and this is something that's not been in Nebraska whatsoever. So what you're seeing is a couple different designs. They both designed them on their own from a lot of research that they did some looking at. They're smaller tunnels, so what are they, 16 feet wide?
12 feet.
12 feet wide. So 12 feet wide, and they're running on, what, 100-foot a run here. So that gives them the opportunity to extend their season and then move the unit down so they can get some crop rotation in. But I'll let her discuss that in a little bit. I do have some papers over, so later on when we're relaxing, we can interact and talk about various things. I did bring a couple pre-publications. It's kind of an act of God to get anything in print at the university, it seems like. Part of it is I don't have a lot of time sometimes, but there's a lot of hoops to go through. But I have 2 handouts that I'll, if you want any of them, talking about high tunnels, how to determine the proper placement, north-south, east-west alignment, talking about various ways to affix them to the ground, talking about the plastics used. So you don't want to use construction film, but these are actually greenhouse polyethylenes. All of you guys are probably experienced in one way or the other, but you may have some questions that you're not sure of. So these handouts I have might help you get your thoughts in order. Like I said, I'm an extension horticulturist at UNL, so you're more than welcome to contact me if you have any specific questions. These are an investment into your production, or a tool also. So we want to make sure it's a useful tool and not a burden to you. So we're hoping that today you get some answers. We can apply some of the general high tunnel information to these particular movable ones, but these are specifically designed to be moved themselves. So I'll have those handouts you can take a look at, and if you have any questions, I'll be here tonight. A huge deal you can go on the internet and see YouTube videos, you can Google, Yahoo, and get all sorts of information from all over the nation. So Casey and I, when we talked about this, Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, South Dakota, Texas, Oklahoma, we have very volatile weather here. So if you're Google searching, looking on the internet, you'll see a lot of this is coming out of the Northwest, California, or Southeast, where they don't have near the crazy weather we do. You're going to see a lot of high tunnels on the internet made out of PVC piping. I do not recommend that whatsoever, and I'll repeat that over and over every time I talk, because the PVC pipe is not designed to be bent like that. It's not designed for the high temperatures. You had 110 degrees in here in February when it was colder than all get out. So the PVCs don't handle that, and they don't like being cold. If they get cold and you got them on a bend, and engineering wise they're stretching on one side and they're tight on the other, they'll just literally explode. So that's the reason for these publications that I have tonight that you're welcome to take, and if I need to print more and send them out, I will. But I talk about the various gauges of metals, and the particular metals, I'll let them talk about it here, but they have a very rigid structure. These things didn't move at all. You'll see they're kind of a little bit over-engineered, because they could have put these bows at 4 feet or 6 feet, and they went with the 4 feet. Our ultimate goal is I want these tools to be useful to you, but if you go online, you're going to find Farm Tech out there. Has anybody seen Farm Tech? Growers Supply, Nexus, Stuppies. There's a whole bunch of people out there selling it, and yours was Johnny's?
Johnny's is where we got the hardware, and I got the film from Farm Tech.
Right. So I want you all to be knowledgeable so you can do apples to apples comparisons, because a lot of these companies are selling a bill of goods, and they'll sell you anything they can. I want you to buy only what you really need to be successful. So I'm going to shut up, because this is actually pretty fascinating what these two have done here. But does anybody have any specific questions of me before we get started at all? Okay, I want you to look closely though as they're talking, because you're going to see they integrated a lot of neat things, and I'm sure they're going to talk about the insect netting they put in, so they can keep the Colorado potatoes inside.
Yeah,
right?
inside, yeah.
Keep the weed seeds in so they don't go out, you know, that type of thing. So we don't want to make this too serious, but we want you to learn a lot tonight, so we want to have a little bit of fun too while we're here. So
Probably about all sums it up right there. But they were talking about, Stacy was talking about knowledge of looking through books and reading material. So we went through, do we do a high tunnel, a caterpillar tunnel, looked at the PVC, and just started throwing things out. You know, what can we make work in western Nebraska? And finally we came up with this design, and I thought it worked pretty well. And I did over design it, but I guarantee this thing won't move. You know.
You said over design, and you mentioned the spacing of these hoops. How about the plastic? And can it go 6 feet or 8 feet, or is that why you?
It
went
says
4
it
foot?
could. It says it can do everything. That's
Oh, yeah.
you read the books and don't follow a thing. Just I would go with your basic area. You know, is it going to be a little bit hidden? Is it going to have a tree break by it? Is it going to be right out in the open?
So that's one of the critical things you want to consider. When you're looking at their plots, you'll notice their plots usually go east-west. And when we discussed this project, I suggested maybe they work with their prevailing wind, which comes out of the south-southwest at this point. So you'll notice that they turn these. It didn't take too much arm turning to do that. But anytime you have a high tunnel, we want to work with the wind as much as we can. We don't want to fight it. Which gets to that other question, is whether it should be at 4 feet, 5 feet, or 6 feet. I wouldn't go any further away than 6 feet apart, because at that point, then your plastic starts wanting to sag in. Given that their particular unit has one layer of plastic, there are some people doing high tunnels that inflate it, but they didn't have electricity out here. Not to mention, engineering-wise, that polyethylene looks like it's clear, but it's actually only sending about 78% of your light through, okay? If we have 2 layers, then it's 78% of the 78%. Does that make some sense? If we, so by inflating it, that allows us to get rigidity to the structure. However, they wanted 1 layer. You see they put that strapping on to keep the flapping on, but you'll notice they probably didn't even need it because you put that plastic on a really warm day. Is that correct? One of the things I recommend with all my years of experience, I used to manage greenhouses for commercial as well as university. I found out the best time to put poly on anything is the hottest day of the year. And that's because plastic is at its largest when it's hot, and it shrinks when it gets cool. And you notice they did that on a hot day, and look how taut that is. If we went to 8 feet apart, there's too much allowance of the banging around. The other thing is this gives them that rigidity holding the structure up. We want quick rainfall to come off, we want the hail to come off, we want ice to come off and snow of that. 6 feet would be the furthest I'd go apart. There's jade or loon. I don't know if anybody's seen that on the internet. Jade or loon greenhouses. I think they're out of the Carolinas. They run 5 feet in between. And what that does is it sets houses up to be 5 feet increments. 4 feet here is pretty standard when you want to have a lot of strength. So if you want a beefy house, it's 4 feet, but then you got to remember you're adding another 25-30% to the cost because all of a sudden now you have a lot more metal. Plus these are movable, so it makes them heavier also. So there's not a single answer. You notice it kind of gets a little bit long-winded, so sorry about that. But yeah, yeah. So go on.
And that's what we always think too. Is you can engineer anything that you want, but I always throw that out and figured what was best for here. And that's why we went 4, and plus that string I think actually helped hold.
Because you have downward pressure as well,
Yep.
so it helps keep it down.
Because when we first put the plastic up, we didn't have the end walls on, and it took a 40-mile-an-hour wind that weekend and didn't lift. And I think the only reason it did that was because of that string on there. And Stacy was talking to us too about our rail on the side. I kind of had run out of room with this rail that holds the plastic on, and the wire I put flat, and he says it's actually supposed to be horizontal or vertical, so the pressure pulls up on it instead of here it's just going to pull on the one side versus
So that
together.
Yeah, if you'll notice, he's got his polylock. The polylock is a C channel like this, and you'll notice the poly is laying down in here with the spring lock or wiggle wire laying in there. And what it does is, if you look at it carefully, you'll notice that it's creating tension in a perforated type setup. So what'll happen is as that polyethylene ages, it potentially could become just like a zipper and just rip open. So I think on your next house, they're going to turn that thing so the C is like this, so we have continuous pull on the plastic all along that header rail on the top of it. So it's just a lesson learned. We all have to learn by experiences and all that. But
And we thought the next time we put the plastic on this tunnel, I'll go ahead and add another board on there to where I'll have the room to go ahead and put that in that way.
Is this right on the end then going?
that's riding right over the bow, and
Or
that,
should it be on the side?
no, it's perfect like
it's
that.
flat.
Yeah, because it's pulling them the other way. It's pulling end to end. But actually, you could do it both ways. You could put it on the face if you wanted, but it doesn't fit the bow very well. So you'd have these pieces.
I was gonna say that'd be pretty hard because I kept looking at that and thinking,
No.
that ain't a chance.
Yeah, it's a pain.
This way it bends.
It
Yes,
bends
it'll
very
bend.
nicely. And the lock that you see on here is the most affordable, commercially available poly-locking system. They call it a spring lock, or also called a wiggle wire, but it's nothing more than an aluminum C channel. Comes in either 4 foot, 6 feet, 10 feet lengths, depending on your shipping. And then it has what we call wiggle wire. It's actually called spring lock generically. You'll need to watch out on the grades of that. Did you end up with the really heavy stuff or not? There's a stainless steel one out there that I recommend that's got more steel memory. You know what I mean? Steel has memory, and the memory of stainless steel is so much better. You can get some just galvanized steel ones, and those lose their memory, so they get weaker every time you take them out and put them in. So, and you will see $1 difference, and that's what I want to tell you is, you know, there's apples to apples comparison. So know what you want and say, you know, I really need to keep the price down. I'm going to use the steel lock this time. Then when I change the pulley, the next time we'll move to the stainless, because it's probably 30-40% higher. But yeah,
I think we did do stainless.
I need to look.
I know you better watch out when you go whipping it around, because it'll.
Yep.
Yeah.
But this is the lighter gauge stainless. There is a heavier one than this one, but this one's pretty light. But it's going to have better memory than the galvanized steel, which would be the lowest entry.
And the lighter gauge starts cutting your plastic quicker.
Yeah.
Over the years.
Yeah.
That's what I thought too. Because when we put it in, you can actually see where it's actually kind of gouged into the plastic. That didn't cut it already, but it's kind of stretched it.
If you've never, has anybody dealt with wiggle wire in here before, out here? So it can take out an eye pretty easy.
Yeah, I wear safety glasses, absolutely.
Okay, so wear safety glasses, and I usually had just one of my kids, I have 7 kids, I'd have one of them just hold the end of it, just to keep it under control. That was their only job. So I just want to give you a heads up, if you've never worked with wiggle wire, it's going to take somebody's eye.
Well, we held the end just so we didn't keep poking it through the plastic.
Well, that's
I mean, that was, you put that first one on there and you go like this and you look up and you're thinking, all right, this isn't going to work. So that's the first thing you do is grab that end, and it all worked out fine. So of course we over designed that, and then I kind of came up with these end walls are somewhat removable, but if you guys want to look at those, we put the 2 doors in them down the tracks in the tunnel. So
before we run off real quick, I want to point out one quick thing that we made a comment about a minute ago. Was I always worry about a building coming down, but after working for the university and the engineers and all that, they said really it's lift that we're more worried about, especially with a high tunnel, because you're going to be opening these up. And it's like a metal building, a metal pole barn. If your barn doors are open on one end and they're closed on the other, you can literally explode your barn. Well, the same thing can happen to these things. So make sure, especially on these roller ones, that it can stay down, because you get wind in there, it catches it, it's going to flip it wherever. So one, we don't want liability of hitting your beautiful house that's down there, but we also don't want anybody to get hurt, and we don't want to lose our crops. So keep in mind too, when you read my stuff, you look at that, you'll see he's got this baby planted in the ground, what, 36 inches down in the ground, every, what, 5 feet or so?
I think those are
6 feet apart. And he's got them bolted in, and everything holds down, and your roller setup is tied into that where it can't lift, right?
it will be.
It will be. It will be. All right.
We're going to do a little bit different design over there, because we just did the T-post into the ground.
Okay.
But like it says on this, and then we just try to get it filled in on the sides to where we're trying to get it to where no air can get up underneath it, because that's my biggest fear with that one over there, the way I've got it. You know, once I finally figure out what I'm going to do to it.
Now, did you guys just stab those in the ground, or were those concreted?
Those are concreted.
Okay. So some of these people, like they did, they ordered it, set their, that's called a ground post, and concreted in. Did you put the bolt in the bottom of that so that when you concreted, the bolt locks into the concrete? Or?
I didn't think I needed it after what I did.
Yeah, it's cool.
Over-engineered.
I think I've got enough in there that it ain't going anywhere.
You know, the greenhouse I had was a 100-footer, and mine were just stabbed in the ground 36 feet, or 36 inches deep. They actually sell some that have auger plates on the bottom, so you can spin them down. So the hay grove tunnel types are like that. People have concreted them in, so there's just a variety of ways. Just make sure that you can hold this baby down to the ground so it doesn't lift up.
If the door's open on both ends, do you have to worry as much?
Not as much for lift, not as much. If you go to hightunnels.org on the internet, you can look at what happened to them in Kansas City, because it literally exploded their houses when the wind got in there. And theirs was the farm, no, theirs was Stuppy polar cubs that exploded. They did not have near the amount of metal. You see, I talked to him about putting this wind bracing in. You'll see these angle pieces in here, and that's to keep the structure from distorting that way. And then he's got the purlins in there. So when you look at hightunnels.org and look at their units that had exploded in a microburst, like happens out here, you'll see the metal's just all bent to half. So.
And then Stacy also told us, and that's what I was telling a few of you earlier, like when we get in here and look at this, we got some of these top rails for the support. They're actually starting to move already. So you actually need to put like self-tappers or something in the ends just to keep them in one place.
So you can buy these clamping devices to hold this, and it's really nice. You see these straps are designed to make it very easy to build your structure however you want. But they sell self-tapping screws, and I highly recommend, even if you do these bolt things, that with the wind and the jiggling and all that, those things will start moving around and weaken your structure. So just a single self-tapping screw in every single one of those will keep that from wanting to move around on you. And they're cheap, about 7 cents a piece. Just make sure you get a good one, they'll just go right in. But I ran one in my wrist once. I still have scars here, so make sure you're careful with self-tapping screws too.
Yeah, and we didn't think we needed them until a couple of those 50, 60 mile an hour winds, you know, then you come out here, and there was actually some of those that were laying all the way down on the side. So, and that's what we got to talking about. But back on this, and like to say, these are going to be movable. So what we're going to do is we'll take about just the bottom 18 inches off of this wall. We've got the wiggle wire on the sides that I can take this off. This is secured here at this height. And this is wiggle wire down here. So I'll pull this loose, pull that wiggle wire loose. I've got wiggle wire on the side of the door right here. So everything will come off and you just fold this plastic up at that height. Then we'll jig made, and I'll keep the doors set just like this, and they should go right down the trails, right down your pathways on the inside. And then this bottom board it's just bolted on. So I'll take a couple bolts off there, 2 on each side of the doors, and those over there, and it should go straight down the tracks. And I'm hoping it stays inside it. And I almost thought about building something just to keep it separated so far, but I think that'd be a little bit tougher too. So my idea is I'm going to run cables on the outside of this, and then I've got a T-post made out of aluminum structural. It's pretty good. It's pretty strong, and I'll just tie that to the tractor, and I'll just drive it.
Because we built this on that end, and then we pushed it this way when we were done, just to make sure that it would move on the track.
And it was in the books. They tell you 4 people can move one of these. I guarantee that's not a chance in the world. And maybe, I don't care how much metal you have on there, I really don't think you can. But they took and they greased up the rails, you know, cleaned them all up, waxed them, and they said 4 people could actually move one of these tunnels. And I don't see that happening. I don't know if you've heard.
Well, I was concerned about the amount of resistance on this originally when we were discussing it. So, yeah, they're going to have to probably pull this one, probably put candle wax down there. It'll be still a pretty tough pull on this one. So the new one you see over there, you can go down there and you can just literally easily move that one by hand. So